Good evening, welcome along to Fridays Off the Ball. It's Nathan with you this evening. Coming up, we have the crappy quiz. Paddy Agnew will talk to us about Italy, a nation also in mourning since their own failure to qualify for the World Cup. And John Duggan will join us in studio to give us his racing tips ahead of the weekend. We're also giving you a chance to join us at the Aviva Fan Studio tomorrow for Ireland against Fiji. All you have to do is send us your best question for our panel, which will include Stuart Lancaster and Fiona Steed. Use the hashtag AvivaFanStudio. Whoever sends in the best question will get to go along and ask it themselves at the game tomorrow. And we are going to start with tomorrow's game because I'm delighted to say we're joined in studio by Brian O'Driscoll. Evening.
Good evening.
2 more years?
Yeah, 2 more years, and it's an absolute disgrace that it's taken this long for just you and I to be able to be in a studio together.
Well, you see, we didn't fully know each other when you signed your initial contract, but then you've had time to look around and you wrote into your contract, I'm not doing this unless I get the brains of the operation. A giant rugby brain needs to be asking me these questions.
This relationship's gone from strength to strength, and there's no need for McIntyre. He's kind of surplus to requirements.
Well, I know he went to Belvedere and he has that rugby background. He grew up alongside Andy Dunn in a team there. Listen, you've got the hard-ass Mayo questions here. This is what you want. I understand the game.
Give the people
as
what
you're
they
about
want.
to see. It's been a tough all week.
It has. Do you know what? It's felt like a bit of a slow death over the last 2 weeks since the report came out.
Was there a sense at any stage during those 2 weeks that you had a chance of winning it?
I felt there was none, and then you hear some Chinese whispers, and I know that our council members were doing, their level best to try and sway opinion, and you got a sense that on one day it was looking better than it had been the previous day, and then by the time we got there on Tuesday it wasn't looking so rosy. All the talk was actually had switched from South Africa to France at that stage. So it was almost like we nearly felt like, well, I felt like we needed to be finally put to death, because that element of hope was keeping us hanging on. And because there's a blind ballot, I suppose you always live in hope that someone might shaft someone. And we'll talk a bit about that, about the whole transparency aspect.
Does it get a bit degrading in those last couple of days that you're quite literally having to go around begging people to change their mind?
Well, I wasn't involved in that, thankfully. But yeah, I'm sure Pa Whelan and John O'Driscoll were putting Ireland's best foot forward, trying to show what we could offer, and trying to encourage particularly the home nations to get on side. I think that was a big part of where we were looking to. We knew it was unlikely we were going to get the Scottish vote. We were trying to get the Welsh vote, but alas, I think that fell by the way. Well, that looks as though it's fallen by the wayside as well. So it wasn't from a lack of trying, and the lobbying that went on, in inverted commas, was obviously pretty impressive by the French, because they turned whatever it was, a 2.5 or 3 point percentage deficit to South Africa on that report into almost a first round victory. To get 18 votes in the first round, with 13 to South Africa and 8 to ourselves, was pretty impressive. So not many people after the evaluation report thought that South Africa were that viable an option.
We heard your interview with Neil Tracy when you were over there on Wednesday, and your disappointment at only being able to secure the 8 votes, when with the amount of effort that the committee have put in and the amount of personal interest you've given this over the last couple of years, is that difficult to take, that all that effort results in such a crushing defeat?
Yeah, but it felt like that immediately, and then when you pare it back and you look at it a bit more closely, it is a fine margin thing. It's a swing vote, and that Welsh vote essentially was huge. Now, not one for pointing fingers. I can understand the rationale behind why Wales went with South Africa. So their chairman, Gareth Davis, was part of the committee set up to come up with this new criteria for nominating the most viable applicant. And so when World Rugby came up with South Africa, it was difficult for him, and as a result the board, to look to their own decision and not go with what World Rugby's, or what this evaluation report has found. So I can understand that. That said, Celtic nations, Pro 14, Six Nations, everything that goes with it, relationships, Lions, all of that is thrown in the mix, and you would have hoped to have gotten them on side. So if you look at their vote, it's the proverbial 6-pointer. You take the 3 off South Africa that they gave them, that reduces them to 10. They give them to us, we get to 11. We get into the second round. And in the second round, there's every chance that you get a huge portion of South Africa's votes that are now gone. So you look at the Kiwis, the Aussies, they've done their job in round 1. Are they going to vote for Ireland? You would hope so. I'm not saying France wouldn't have gotten enough to get over the line, but I think it might have been a lot tighter than you would necessarily look back and consider was plausible.
I guess the question then is how we got to this stage of the bid without having their support in the bag. It would have almost been assumed when this started that we can count on the support of England, Scotland and Wales. There's literally no point going forward with this unless we can count on their support. Now, Scotland, I think, made it clear quite early they were going to follow the money. But with all the politicking that goes on, with the relationships that have been built up through the Pro 14, through the 2 unions, the disappointment in that group, in the committee, not to get that Welsh vote, does it leave a lot of bitterness within the committee?
I think there was obviously big disappointment that they didn't go with us.
It's probably slightly different for you in that
it
move
is.
on your life in a different way.
I don't have to deal with them on a weekly basis or a monthly basis. I'm not on Six Nations committees and so on, where you have to rub shoulders with them. I think from the overall picture, you have to realise too that they went and went with the nominated team of South Africa and then didn't get the job done. So they sort of dirtied their bib with us, and then in the same breath, they didn't actually manage to elect the team that had been nominated. So it's almost a double loss from their perspective. Listen, we'll all move on from this, but elephants don't forget, and there'll be other decisions in future, be it Six Nations or Lions decisions.
Yeah,
that I'm sure we'll have, and it will impact in some capacity, because I suppose what goes around does come around.
Yeah, it will be interesting to see what sort of long-term ramifications there are for those relationships, particularly when you think of something like the Pro 14 and the value of Leinster and Munster to any league, and the money that is there in France and the money that is there in the Premiership, who would only be too happy to see the Irish provinces to become a part of that over the coming years.
And in fairness, and social media is sometimes a bad barometer to judge anything by, but there was considerably more Welsh people getting on saying we're devastated that the WRU didn't vote for you guys. Would have loved a World Cup over there. Of course, you had a few. I did have someone somewhat entertaining send me a picture of a baby throwing their toys out of the cot. So there's, you're going to split opinion. But ultimately, yeah, it is on a country that you would feel would side with you the majority of the time in your hour of need. It does feel that we were let down, and we needed everything to go our way, particularly having been nominated third best side. Even though all 3 were very viable options, to go from third to first would have completely discredited the whole process. So
if it's not discredited already,
listen, it's a lesser version of discrediting. But if we'd gone from third to first, I think there would have been absolute outroar. You would have had 2 super nations of the world up in arms, and I think there's lots of other factors to it as well. I think the factor of money. Japan in 2019, is there a little bit of a concern with it going to new territory there? Absolutely. And do you take a second risk of go to a nation that's never hosted it before, or one that seems to be in a bit of turmoil in South Africa? So is the safe bet to go with France? Without a shadow of a doubt. They were offering a bigger package. They could deliver it. If you gave them a month's notice, I'm sure they could put it together. They've got everything. They've got the credibility of holding, Olympics. The Olympics the following year, World Cups, European Cups, the Rugby World Cup in 2007. So, it's an easier decision to go with a side like that when 90% of your revenue of a 4-year period culminates from one tournament. They can't make an error 2 tournaments on the bounce.
There's understandably some bitterness when you put so much in and you don't win it, and there is a little bit of throwing the toys out of the pram when you don't get it and questioning everything. But the Welsh votes were so important that if Ireland had won the technical vote, there's a very good chance that Ireland would then have gone on to win
It's speculation, you know.
But when you're meeting afterwards and you're meeting for the final time and you're going through everything, are there regrets there about what went into that technical report? When you think of security, that somehow South Africa get a better score in security,
that's got to be an error, right? I'm not here to pull the report apart, but I don't think you have to be a genius to realise.
Is it an error on their part or an error on our part?
I don't think
in what they were looking for.
Yeah, did we understand the specifics of exactly what that meant? I don't know if that's the case. Likewise with Stadia, did we know? Would we have bothered with a pitch if we'd known that it was going to impact us so badly that our stadia weren't built as opposed to the plans to build them? I would have thought if we had known all of that information, we definitely wouldn't have been so forthright in putting ourselves forward and putting ourselves out there. The fact that it is an initial report, first time ever doing it, there was always going to be an element of the unknown involved, and unfortunately that element of unknown has really come back and bitten us on the asses.
Ultimately, it seems as though it came down to money, that France can guarantee a return for World Rugby. That was what interests Scotland. That is probably what interests Italy. That's what interests a lot of the nations who are struggling right now, and they want that guaranteed return. Part of the committee must feel, why didn't you just tell us this 2 years ago? If you're that if it was always going to come down to the return, we knew we couldn't match it. Why drag everybody through this?
Yeah, listen, it's funny. The more I realise, my involvement, being involved, and seeing what happens on a monthly and yearly basis, there's so much politics in sport, and I'm not saying I thought we were impervious to politics, far from it, but I thought it was less impactful in rugby. It's absolutely not. It's as big and it's as relevant in rugby as it is in any other sport. And I don't know, was there what level of deals could have been done, what horse trading went on, I'm not sure. I know that we didn't get involved in any of that, but the reality is we have to accept a decision. It's France 2023, not Ireland 2023. They'll host a great World Cup. They know how to do it. You have to suck it up and unfortunately lick our wounds and go back and see as the process evolves and if there's modifications made to it. Do we then have another pitch in 4 or 8 or 12 years' time?
Yeah, it's probably 8 or 12.
At the moment, it's very hard to see 4 years' time. There was such a body of work went into it that the thought of going again...
You can't just copy and paste a good chunk
of
that.
Exactly. It's like we had Geldof and Liam Neeson. Like we'd have to resurrect W.B. Yeats or something, for something more impactful. So we kind of topped out first time. Yeah. I don't know where we're meant to go.
We called in all the favours.
I don't know where we're meant to go. So, yeah, we'll know with a little bit more time. But it's frustrating because I think we gave it our best shot. We did. We couldn't magic those stadia into completion. But everything along the process was close to perfection as I think we could have imagined, and you take some relief from that as well, that you don't look back and go, if we 18 months ago, if we hadn't made that error, it wasn't a screw up along the way, if we'd had more foresight there, we could have done that or plugged that hole. I don't sense that there was any of that. So with that we take comfort that we were not the most viable option according to all the council members, and you have to take them.
We're going to talk about Ireland, Fiji in a moment, but I want to talk to you about Ronan O'Gara and the news that has come out this week that he's in talks with Canterbury to move to Super Rugby next season to take over as an assistant coach. There's always rumours about Ronan moving back to Ireland, and he always says he wants to go through the process and wants to learn coaching properly, and when he does eventually return, he ultimately wants to be ready. And you sort of think at times, well, you're saying that, but when the big job comes, you'd step right in. Moving to New Zealand, granted for the best rugby club in the world, it would be a hugely brave step.
Yeah, it would. I think he's done all the right things from a coaching perspective. He's stepped away from his comfort zone. He's gone into new markets, understood his trade or the need to evolve his understanding of how the game works from different perspectives. He's gone and learnt a new language. He's up to his family from Cork. He's got 5 kids and a very understanding wife. And I'm sure he's learnt an awful lot in the last 3.5 or 4 years. This opportunity has come along, it's presented itself. He's obviously doing something right where Dan Carter has sent word back home to Canterbury that maybe absolutely that he could help them. Maybe a bit of word has come back as well from his time in Ireland camp via Greg Feek as well, within that route back to Canterbury too. But I think it would be a great move for Ronan, because the Kiwi way is very different than the Irish way and the French way. So to get a more holistic view of how you can coach, I think would only serve him well when he does eventually come back to these shores or wherever next he goes, because he's climbing the ladder, there's no doubt. And is Canterbury an improvement from Racing? Yes, it is. And then inevitably he'll want to come back home, and inevitably he'll want to coach with Munster, and one day he will say that he'll want to be Irish coach. But be careful how quickly you get to the top too, it's a long life ahead of us. And if you get fast tracked really quickly and he gets there at 46 or 47 and he gets 2 or 3 years there before your 50th birthday, you're falling down off the bad side of a peak. So yeah, you have to be smart, and I think he's been very smart thus far in the way he's handled himself, the way he's gone about staying in touch with the relevant parties too, plugging himself into the Irish setup with Joe, with all his tweets wishing Munster so well in their next European Cup game and how much he adores them.
You got to play the game.
He is playing it magnificently. I get into him about it. The prodigal son coming home the last 2 seasons with Racing, but he's Munster through and through, and it's inevitable that he'll be back there in the not too distant future, I would think.
It seems like an incredibly exciting opportunity and such a smart move from him, considering we've something of an obsession with Southern Hemisphere coaches in Ireland and probably in the Northern Hemisphere. Is there a big difference in quality of coaching?
I don't know. You look at you'd have to spend time down there to appreciate that where their level is at. You get the impression that their basics are considerably better. Well, they are better than everyone else in the world. Their catch pass, their ability to do the simple things very well under pressure, that looks as though it's one of the aspects that they're front runners in the world with. The skill set of their tight five in Super Rugby and in the All Blacks, I think, supersedes everyone else in the world, and allows them to play that 15-man game, where it doesn't matter, with number on your back, whatever position you find yourself in, you can be a rucker as a winger or you can be a ball player as a second row. So I think they've been the standard bearer of that style, and everyone else is still playing catch up. I think the rest of the world has realised that that's the way they have to go, and that's great from an Irish perspective. We're seeing the likes of Tyg Furlong coming in, and that's his game. He reads the game. He can play. He can scrummage. He can lift. So he's almost of that mould. I think you just need everyone in your tight five to be able to do that too, to match the best teams.
Is that happening here? Is that coming? Is this
I think
next
we're going
generation?
in the right route. Yeah, I do think we're going the right route. I think you look at, I think Jack McGrath's skills are probably a little bit better than Cian Healy's, but Cian's abrasiveness at the moment is better than Jack's. At hooker, Rory Best was always reasonably skillful player. He's definitely in the winter of his career. The new breed coming through, I need to see a bit more of Niall Scannell, what his game is like there. But Devon Toner's skills have come on no end under Joe Schmidt and Stuart Lancaster and Leo Cullen in the last few years. He's become a playmaker. Ian Henderson's always had a great offloading game. So and James Ryan is going to be a quality player. So if you look at the Irish second rows and the Irish front rowers, along with Dave Kilcoyne and some other guys, John Ryan can play too. Yeah, we're definitely going that direction. We're definitely an improvement on years gone by, but with work to do.
I know there's a large Southern Hemisphere presence at Racing at the moment, but from everything we've heard of the culture of French rugby, it does sound as though it would be a massive culture shock to move from French rugby to New Zealand rugby and the standards that are expected of both.
Yeah, but it's been a huge culture shock for him to go to France too, and they do things very differently there. You have to be very self-motivated as a player too. You know, you hear it from from the likes of Johnny that came back. You know, his stint didn't work as he would have liked. But even from a point of view of going to the weights room, a lot of those people that players that want to go and do that extra workload, it's on their own bat rather than
it's optional.
rather than being forced to do so by the strength and conditioning guys. So the really great pros are willing to do it, but lots of guys take the easy option. And so that culture shock has already happened. Would it be another culture shock? Of course, but I think you're going into an environment where you would learn so much at a short space of time down there and see how things are done and streamlined and how they fast track players, how they identify people at a young age and what it is that they look to focus on. You look at the Baby Blacks; they haven't won that under-20 World Cup very often in the last 4 or 5 years, and that's largely because they're not big into their set piece. They're all skill focused, and they say at 2021 they can always build that technique side of things of their ability to scrummage, their ability to function well off set piece and line out. So that comes as part and parcel of developing as a player. But at the you do look at them under 20s. Boy, can they catch pass and do the basics extremely well.
And they won't lose that.
And they don't lose that. You only lose that if you don't continue practicing that. And they obviously do that. They do a huge amount of skill work. But then when you start adding the other dimensions to their game, that's why you see complete sides, and that's why you see the All Blacks, supreme team more often than not.
Let's turn our attention to Ireland against Fiji then. Huge changes, 13 changes to the side. The back three, Andrew Conway, Darren Sweetenham and Dave Carney. Joey Carberry getting a start at number 10. Rhys Ruddock captaining the side. Looking at Joey Carberry at number 10, Joe Schmidt, is there a frustration there, do you sense, that he's not getting to see him at all at number 10 at Leinster, that it's all playing at full back? And why is he playing him at 10 and not giving him a chance at 15?
It's undoubtedly a frustration for Joe Schmidt. He wants him to be in the 10 jersey. He's his backup 10 at the moment as we stand with the trials and tribulations of what's going on with Paddy Jackson in Belfast. So Joey is the automatic second choice 10. He obviously had a phenomenal debut coming on and closing out the game against the All Blacks in Soldier Field a year ago. He had some mixed fortunes in the summer. He probably didn't play at his very best over in America, where they still got the job done because Ireland are a superior team to that American side. But yeah, as well as Joey has been playing at full back, it's a learned skill, constantly playing week in, week out, and it's a completely different game that is needed. Much less time at 10. When the ball's kicked down to you at full back, you've time on the ball. You can pick your option, kick, pass, run. It's very little. Most of the time, very little pressure on you. Whereas at 10, it's instantaneous reactions. So a player that has played full back for the season, it's going to take a little bit of time for him to get in there. But Joey Carberry's a natural footballer, so you'd imagine within 5, 10, 15 minutes he'll play his way into the game, with doing some simple things very well.
Because when you were talking on Monday Night Rugby with Eddie O'Sullivan about Robbie Henshaw and potentially Henshaw ending up at full back at some stage, you were making the point that you need to be super talented to be able to switch between positions. When you look at Joey Carberry, do you see someone who's super talented who can do that with ease?
Yeah, I do. I think he sees himself as a 10, but I think you look at some of the super talented players around the world at the moment, and an obvious one is Bowden Barrett, who's played a good bit of 10 and 15. Damien McKenzie's done some 10 and 15 as well. So it is the obvious switch. If you're going to have multiple positions and one of them is 10, it's easier to fit into 15 because you're able to read the game well, and you have to have a clarity of thought when you're in those two positions as to pull the trigger with the correct decisions. You can also see the 10 playing a little bit of 12. Could I see Joey Carberry playing 12? Absolutely, if you wanted that second distributor. just a couple of question marks as to whether he has the physicality to be able to match the likes of Stuart McCluskey coming running down his channel, or this weekend this guy. Batia, I think his name is, the Fijians that are listening to us.
Who's playing at back row at club level.
My pronunciation isn't spot on, but he plays back row and centre, and this guy's an absolute animal. So he'll be a handful for Carberry in the 10 channel. He'll be looking for advantage line ball all day against them.
Is there a risk that we waste a couple of years of Joey Carberry by just leaving him as backup to Johnny Sexton? Okay, there's always the risk Sexton picks up an injury between now and the World Cup, and you want Carberry to be ready. But why isn't Schmidt looking at him as a 15 right now for the World Cup?
He obviously doesn't see him as a 15. He sees him as a backup 10. I think and he's shown it in the past, that if Rob Kearney is fit, that he's his guy. And does Joey have all the attributes to play 15 in a Joe Schmidt team? I'm not sure. Joe likes guys that do the basics extremely well. He's not after flashy players. He likes guys, good team players, honest workhorses, and don't have a high error count. Let's say Joey makes a lot of errors, but he tries things, and he has wonderful X factor and creates something from nothing. But he also is prone to the odd error as well. Now, that's exciting for us all, but not so much for a coach. And that's why you've seen the likes of Rob Kearney in the 15 jersey. Jared Payne, likewise. He doesn't make an awful lot of errors. So, don't expect that to change. If he continues at 15 and he plays brilliantly for Leinster for the season, he keeps Rob Kearney out, well, obviously then he's going to have to look at him in February in the Six Nations. But for now, I think he sees him as his backup 10. Yeah,
and he wasn't afraid, Schmidt, to heap a little bit of pressure on Joey Carberry ahead of this game as well, because of his lack of game time at number 10. He says we don't necessarily have many windows for Joey to accelerate his learning, so this is his opportunity for us to try and accelerate it to the best we can. Talks about his lack of competitive minutes at number 10. Says it's going to be a tough day at the office for Joey. We really want to see how he negotiates that, really. When you look at the inexperience of this side, and having been in Schmidt's dressing room, what does he look for inexperienced players when they're thrown in at the deep end like this?
Well, he's been talking in the papers today about he's looking out for individual performances, but that individual performance is just in doing the role that they know is assigned to them extremely well, and that is as a cog within the wheel, and that allows everyone to be able to function better in their performance too. So
is it all decision making?
He's not looking for individual brilliance. He's not looking for moments of magic. If they come, that's an added bonus, but he's looking for that ability to have continuity irrespective of who the players are, that they know the plays and the lines of running as well as the guys that were in there last week, that you're still able to bring the same level of physicality that was done in defence against South Africa, keeping them tryless. All of that onus now doesn't shift because you've got a second string team coming in there. I think all that chat during the week, or you see in the papers today with Joey Carberry and with other players, it's trying to put a pressure and squeeze it on them to see if they're actually up to the challenge, because he wants guys that are mentally tough, physically obviously able for this standard and for this level, but are they mentally tough in being able to deal with an extra force of pressure coming from him and a level of expectation?
Is he looking for these players to almost be a carbon copy of the player that's in the first 15?
Yeah, but you I think there's an appreciation from Joe that it's not like for like. You're not getting the same player in Stuart McCluskey as you're getting in Bundyaki. You're not getting the same in Jacob Stockdale as you are in Darren Sweetenham. So you have to be able to fit into the focus of what the team is trying to do. And they do a huge amount of power plays. And by power plays, they have a lot of setup plays where, they have to look for hard yards in phases 2 and 3 to be able to manipulate a defence to make them make a poor decision, and then they're able to counteract that. So much of the early stuff, rather than attacking and trying to score off first phase, a lot of it is really setup stuff. You see occasional breaking of that in the beautiful line-out move where Stockdale went through last week in the lead up to Rhys Ruddock's try. It was a brilliant line-out play, but for the most part, it's about understanding you have to break teams down, and you've got to be able to try and pull good systems apart and then put players through holes in making a decision where you've one of 2 or 3 options and playing heads-up rugby and being able to pick it on the move.
So it's always working with the thought that you're going to be playing in England or New Zealand and that nothing's going to come easy in those games.
Yeah, but he Joe does so much analysis on the opposition that he tweaks and modifies all the plays to counteract what their defence does. So we see the same plays being done time and time again, but he pulls them back in because he knows a particular defence is going to react a certain way. We've seen that, a couple of hit-ups and then Murray to Rory Best and looping around and the ball back into Rob Kearney. I couldn't believe he nearly got through again. And only that Tyg Furlong couldn't deepen the ruck long enough to not allow the guard from the far side to come back and make a last-ditch tackle on Rob Kearney. So, it's all those tiny, minute details that allows the team to have those line breaks. And it sort of amazes me that he's able to pull the plays back from years that we've seen with Leinster, but brings it back in because he knows a particular individual or a particular team likes to do this, and teams are creatures of habit.
So he can identify that South Africa, the way they're set up, the way they're coached, the way they are individually, even though they have probably looked at this video, it's just not in their nature to counter it. Yeah,
he can make them make bad decisions. He can get his players to make them make bad decisions. So, I think as well when you're fatigued, at particular times of the game, plays will be pulled out. 10 minutes, 5 minutes. 10 minutes before half time when there's fatigue setting in, or in the last 15 minutes of a game where players switch off mentally a little bit and they get back into their habits, or where you chase a player across the field in defensive line rather than playing hard up I'm trying to play a zone defence. So with hours of research and hours of analysis, you only get to identify individuals, but also how systems and what errors they make in those systems, and then how you can put them or how you can punish them as a result of it.
It's a huge amount of information for any player to have to take in.
I can't tell you the amount of information they do have to take in, and the expectation. And when Joe does a new play and he shows a new play, get it first time. It's not like, I only saw that once and you only ran through it for a second on the whiteboard, and sorry, I wasn't sure about my line of running. That's gone. There's an immediate expectation that everyone gets it right, which can be a bit frightening, particularly if you're new to that setup. And he probably cuts a small bit of slack of, the younger lads, a Jacob Stockdale type player. You can't frighten them in a new environment early. But experienced players that had never been coached by Joe before, that had come from other provinces outside of Leinster, they got a shock when he came in, and the expectation of getting it immediately was put on them.
Well, we heard this week you got a shock yourself back in the day. The story finally was made public. It had sort of become an urban myth.
And that's what it is, right?
Is it? So just in case anyone missed it, Fergus McFadden was talking with Luke Fitzgerald on his podcast.
Liars.
Early in Joe's time at Leinster back in 2010, about 4 or 5 games in, we're playing Cardiff, I think it was. It wasn't a defensive scenario, but it was in attack. Someone threw Dricko an absolute daisy cutter of a pass. Dricko drops it. Slippy day, hard one to take. Joe's gone through it, and eventually he comes to you, and he's not quite happy. Joe's picked out the clip with Dricko dropping the ball. He just to the group flippantly says, "Yeah, Dricko, good players take those," and stopped and turned back to the footage. The whole room, there was a collective gasp, and it was like, Jesus, who is this guy? It was a great way to set out his stall. Whether it was pre-planned or not, I don't think it was because Dricko was like, Jesus, that hasn't happened to me in about 10 years.
The problem with this is that I've had my Joe moments with other people, and now I'm getting my comeuppance with it. Do you know what? Maybe I've extinguished it from my memory. It quite possibly did happen that way, and you try and.
But maybe it was one of those things that for you were able to take it, and that's why he gave it to you, and it wasn't a big deal. But for everybody else in the room, the fact that this leader, that he singled you out, they're like, whoa.
Like this moment did happen. I don't remember it specifically being a video session. It by the sounds of things, it's probably quite right. But it was a thing, and that line was used until I retired. It was like, good players catch them. If I dropped the ball at training, the lads would be on immediately, good players catch them. So it definitely did become a tagline. And I remember being put in my box, that makes it sound like I was, chopped at the knees. I probably was a bit, ooh, but like you get on with it. No one's impervious to being put down or being contradicted on an opinion, and Joe is the best man to make sure that's the case.
Was it always clear from his tone that he didn't want to be questioned?
If you were going to question him, you had to have a serious counter argument, and there was lots of times that I was confident on something, but I let it go because I just wasn't. It wasn't definitive. Whereas, if I did feel as though I felt strongly enough about something, I would challenge him. And if you put a good enough argument up, it mightn't be in total agreement, or he mightn't totally accept it. But if it was decent enough, he might go, all right, fair enough. I see where you're coming from. We'll still do my way.
That's probably why he has so much time for analysis. He doesn't have players coming into his room every 20 minutes bitching and moaning.
He has set his stall out exactly as all coaches should do.
Back to the game then. The centre partnership, Chris Farrell, Stuart McCluskey, two big boys. Is that a needs must when you look at this Fijian side?
I don't think I don't think he's picking because of the opposition. He's picking because these two guys deserve their opportunity. Stuart McCluskey, certainly, if you're an Ulster fan, people feel has been very hard done by since his first cap against England a year and a half ago.
18 months ago, yeah.
And he didn't do too badly on the day, but I just don't think that he's a favourite of Joe Schmidt's. I think what he does extremely well, but I think in Joe's team you need to have a little bit more to your game, and he'll definitely put pressure on him this week to show him that he has more than a power game and an offloading game, and that he can be physically dominant. He's going to want him to be able to be a distributor and someone that can link backs and forwards and show that he's got a fuller complement to play with than maybe perception currently is. And
Chris Farrell, we've seen, has made a few errors with his passing so far. Bernard Jackman was saying during the week from his time with Grenoble that he's a far better passer of the ball than we've seen. Is it a similar situation with what Schmidt is looking at with him? He knows he has the physicality, but if he doesn't have those basics, he's not going to last here for too long.
Yeah, I'm interested to see Farrell. I quite like him as a player, and he's... there was one game where he threw a couple of passes that weren't a million miles off, that drifted a little bit forward, and if they hadn't gone forward, they would have been, almost try-scoring passes. He looks
that
as though...
doesn't sound like a Joe Schmidt review session there.
No, but he looks as though he has a skill set to play more of a game than just a power game. So, listen... you're playing with a 10 that wants to run the ball. I wonder, will they kick the ball less as a result of Joey Carberry and Marmion, it not being the strong points of their game? They're both running players. They've got a back three that do like to counter-attack, kick when they have to kick. But you look at Sweetenham, he's going to want to get the ball in hand. He'd a cameo at the weekend and did well, but he's going to want his first start as... something to remember, ball in hand, as all wingers do. And Conway is out to full back, and Dave Carney getting in on the wing. So those two guys are very much Joe Schmidt players. Again, committed, obviously very talented players, but do the basics extremely well. So I'm looking forward and hopeful that they're going to try and play with a good expansive game, with good width, where we see the centres showing more than bludgeoning the opposition. Because as well, you have to remember, if you run into the Fijians, they're there to hit you. They aren't going anywhere. So you got to move them around. So
we're going to turn tradition on its head somewhat, and we're going to play the running game. Are Fiji going to play a running game?
Do they know any other way?
Have they not changed slightly? Have they not sorted out their set pieces?
Their set pieces
a bit
better,
solid?
but you don't have to listen. You can maul a little bit more. But once you get your set piece is a means to playing the rest of your game. It's not going to dictate whether you win or lose. Oh, sorry, it might dictate you losing, but it doesn't necessarily always. If you get an ascendancy in set piece that you're going to go on and beat a side. It's a structure to be able to go and play the rest of your game, and they want to be able to offload. They don't want rucks. That's just not their game. That you see it in their sevens. it's always been the case in their 15s too. They like throwing 50-50s. And you look at some of the firepower that they have. Obviously, everyone knows Nakawara from playing in Racing, who's come from Glasgow. But the back three of Nadolo and Nagusa both playing in Montpellier. And your man, this guy Murray Valu, plays with La Rochelle. Like, these guys like to counter-attack. You're not going to see the ball kicked a lot from them if Joey Carberry kicks it in behind them. So you want to make sure your kick contest is good, because we saw in the RDS when Leinster kicked poorly to Nadolo, he destroyed them when he carried back. You know, he carried for over 100 metres in that game, and scored a couple of tries. So you're going to have a smart kicking game, because ultimately they do want to counter-attack. They're a counter-attacking mentality.
It is a sellout, so there should be a decent atmosphere, and Joe Schmidt should get what he wants. He should get these players tested by a Fiji side who are 9th in the world, who are looking above that already. It should be a proper test.
Yeah, listen, they've won 4 of their last 5 games. They had a narrow enough defeat to Italy last weekend.
Where I don't think they had much time together either before that game.
And listen, the last 4 games, I think it was Tonga, Samoa, Scotland and Italy maybe. So some decent sides. Won well against Samoa in Samoa. So this is a decent side to be reckoned with. There's, Matawalu's on the bench because his service at 9 is pretty terrible. But this guy, Senalini, scored a hat-trick in the Samoan game during the summer. So, he knows how to play ball too. So we should have an expansive open game where hopefully it'll be pretty entertaining, both sides wanting to play and see some tries.
All right, so that all gets underway 5:30 tomorrow to be a tasty little warm-up as well between England and Australia. We'll look back on that game and everything else with you next week. Thanks for coming in, Brian.